We're going to call this video Final Tips and Tricks. Just a few little notes I wanted to point out when assembling your Bipester, in particular hinging. In order to hinge this Bipester, you're going to, on the elevator, the left-hand elevator side, you're going to cut a narrow slot. All your control horns are going to wind up being the same way. They're 1/32 inch plywood, aircraft ply, and you're going to cut a slot for that 32nd inch plywood horn into your control surface. I'm not sure how well this is going to show up, but you cut a 32nd inch slot. You can see it doesn't even come all the way through. The covering is still left there, but you want to get rid of all the wood in that slot. And then you can see beside the slot I've cut a little clearance out of the covering material for the triangular horn reinforcement. When that horn is on there, this little piece of triangle stock is going to go on there and support it, and that little piece of removed film is going to give you the glue point that you need to hold those horns on. Okay, so all your control surfaces are the same way. Here's an aileron. It's slotted, and there's a little piece of film removed for the triangle, and that's the way those go. Like I said, left hand, top of the left hand elevator half, and on the rudder the right hand side. And then eventually you will put a horn in there. The horn will go in, and then where you've left that little clear piece, then a piece of triangular stock will go in there and hold it on. What you wind up with is a very light and very strong horn assembly. Now what I would like to talk about now is hinging, and you're going to receive in your kit some Blenderm. You can't see the Blenderm, it's translucent, it's on a piece of backing. It's about this size. You can't really see it, but what you need to do is you need a total of 24 Blenderm hinges for a Bipester kit. So what you're going to do, divide your Blenderm in half. And I've put marks on here, you can't see it, but I just put little tick marks. I've taken my Blenderm, I cut it in half. I put a tick mark cutting in half, and then I put a tick mark cutting in quarters, and then I put a tick mark cutting in between that into eighths. So I know right where all the pieces are going to be. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it in half. I'm going to cut it in half, and then I'm just going to cut out all those pieces. Or either way, you could cut out your strips and then cut those in half, and that's going to give you hinges. So let's go ahead and do that. Oh, sorry about that. Kicked the camera. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start cutting out these hinges where I've got them marked. And they wind up being about 3/8. In this case, they're about 3/8 inch thick. And that's going to be 2 hinges. We'll cut those in half. And there you go. There's your hinge. That's 2 hinges. And we'll do that with all of these. Cut them right in half. You wind up with 2 hinges. Okay, now let's talk about hinging. When you're hinging these control surfaces, what you want to do is you want to have a couple of pieces of painter's tape, and you want to set your control surface that you're hinging flat on the table, and you want to give yourself the gap that you're looking for. In fact, slightly larger than the gap you're looking for, because it will close up just by the nature of the Blenderm. It'll close up. So give yourself about a 1/16 of an inch gap, and then put your piece of painter's tape somewhere on the surface where the hinges aren't going to be. On the elevator, I think a good place to put it is like right up here. That'll hold it. Put one there and put one up there. Now the gap is being held by the painter's tape. You can see it. Now you can put your Blenderm hinges on, and your gap will be just right. This, again, I said there's about a 1/16 of an inch, and that's what you want. It'll wind up being more like a 1/32 of an inch when you get it completely done. Okay, the elevator has 1, 2, 3, 4 hinges on top, and on the same thing on the bottom, 4 hinges on the bottom. The rudder, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to tape it. You're going to tape it right up here. Well, here it is. You're going to take your rudder stabilizer assembly, establish your gap, and then you could put a piece of painter's tape right here holding these together, just where your hinges aren't going to be. And then it has 1, 2 hinges on it, both sides. And ailerons, same thing. Ailerons are going to have 3 hinges on top and 3 hinges on bottom, 1, 2, 3. And in that case, since you're going to have a hinge here in the middle and on the end, just put your painter's tape right here and right here. And that's all I wanted to say about that. The hinging process is complete on these parts now. I wanted to reiterate, when you hinge, there's a real technique to using Blenderm. You want a much larger gap, like I said, every bit of a 1/16 of an inch when you use your blue painter's tape. And then when you get your hinges on there, which these are on there now, you'll see, stick them on real good and then push on them and push the surfaces together. Squeeze the hinges, push the surfaces together, squeeze and push, push. And what that does is that puts a little Blenderm down into the gap. And look, your gap almost completely disappears and it's nice and free. And that all depends on you having a pretty large gap, at least a 1/16 of an inch when you lay your Blenderm hinges down. That's where these come in handy. Okay, tape them down with a good 1/16 inch gap, press them together. I've done the same thing here. This gap was huge when I put it together. Then you're going to squeeze the hinges, squeeze and push them together, squeeze and push, and look at that hinge gap. Beautiful. And it also leaves it very, very free. Look at that. Okay, that's an important technique for using Blenderm hinges. One last word about these control surfaces. You also, obviously in the main build video, we've already talked about removing a piece of Solite for the top and bottom, for the glue to adhere to bare wood. On the bottom, it's not so important to have a center mark right now, but for the top, you do need a center line drawn. You can see I've displaced it over a 1/16 of an inch, and I have used that as a guide to put this on. I'll use that to install the vertical stabilizer. It's a center line, but it's displaced over a 1/16 of an inch for the thickness of this. You really need that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this on, and then I'll put my little triangle stocks on later. That's covered in the main video. A good idea while I'm thinking about it. It's better to do this before you do the hinging. I didn't, and I'm sorry. It makes it a little more tricky, but do this film removal before you do the hinging. I'm about to glue the wings, the bottom wings for starters, on this Bipester. And here's a trick that I didn't cover well enough. I did cover it, but I want you to see this a little bit better. I have a small jeweler's Phillips head. What I'm going to do with this jeweler's Phillips head before I glue these wings is I'm just going to dent to the depth of about a 1/16 of an inch. I'm going to dent. I'm going to make little dents as far back as I can without distorting that wing. Now I have dented this with a nice little hex shape of the screwdriver. Now, I know you can't see that, but you get the idea. I have dented. I put about 20 little dents into that, into the root end of this wing. I'm going to do that with all the wings. When you brush your epoxy on there, when you spread your epoxy on, it's going to get into those holes, and I assure you, it's going to increase the strength of that bond just exponentially. It'll make very big difference in the durability of your Bipester. Here you see I've glued the bottom wings on. Gluing the top wings was kind of hit or miss. You just stick them on, hold them in place, try to line them up as best you could and hold them in place while the epoxy dried. Well, just right now I came up with a great idea that we're going to execute for the first time. This will be included in all the kits. If you look, you can see there's a hole here and there's a hole here now. And in the kit, I'm going to provide two little pieces of 1mm carbon rod. What we're going to do is we're going to stick that 1mm carbon rod through these holes. And what that's going to do is that's going to give you some place to bring that, to rest that top wing on for alignment purposes. You won't have to guess at all. You'll just stick it on there and you'll know it's in exactly the right place. So that's what we're going to do. Look for these two little pieces of 1mm rod. They might be one single piece that you need to cut apart. But you could use a little extra from your wing rods. But there you go. That's what we're going to have. Now when you put the top wing on there, it'll automatically fall down and rest right on those, and you'll know it'll be perfect alignment. Look at that. It's perfect alignment. Okay? And I'll CA those in so that they're nice and sturdy, and you'll never even notice them when the build is complete. Let's talk about Bipester build tip number 17. Again, in the build videos, we talk about getting your inner plane connecting struts in there properly. What I've done since I shot the main build video is I've created this. You can see it's got an airfoil like the top of this Clark Y wing. What we're going to do is we're going to use this for establishing where the top wing ultimately gets glued. In the build video, I have you put your struts in like they are right here and glued into the bottom wing first. All the bottom ones get glued. The tops are still sliding around. What you're going to do is you're going to pull the top up, leaving plenty of room to put some foam safe CA on the struts, and then you're going to use this template that comes with the kit. Yours will be white or blue, and you might want to transfer it to a heavy piece of board like I did here. And then what you're going to do is you're going to set this right in place when you glue your wings, and then you're going to slide your wing. Let me see if I can get this. You're going to slide your wing down, slide your top wing down onto the glue on the rods until it lines up just like that. And that's what you're going to use this for. That's going to help you align it. Put it on the inside of the struts and slide the wing right down into the glue. You'll know it's perfect aligned both sides. Here's a little tip for installing the AR6400 LBL board. You notice that I've already stuck it in there. The board is already in place with the motor wires on the right, the battery wires on the left. It's just flopping around loose in there right now. Okay, and here's what we're going to do. I found the easiest way to install this board. Cut your 3M tape to size. Okay, with the board already in place. And then I'm just going to tell you what, I happen to have a pair of tweezers that I'm going to use for this. You could use anything, but this gives you great control over the. If you have a pair of tweezers, works good. And what we're going to do is we're just going to lift this board up, basically right where we want it. We're going to lift it up, and we're just going to slide this tape underneath. Make sure we have it right where we want it. And you see how easy that was. You may not have seen the whole process, but it's in there now. I just slipped it up under there and stuck it in. That really makes it much easier. I'm going to do the same thing on this other side. I'll just take my piece of tape, take the backing off of it, grab it with the tweezers. I'll lift up on the board and just slide it underneath.
Works very well.
This is tip 576. Yuck, yuck. I'm installing the control surface rods right now. I've made a Z-bend on the front of this rod and it's hooked up to the servo. Now I'm going to hook it up to the rudder. There's no provision for adjustment of these rods, so you want to get them very close if possible. You want to get them as close as you can. So what I've got is I've got a couple of pieces of 16th inch balsa wood and a clip. And I'm going to do this to all the control surfaces when I hook them up. I put some balsa wood on either side of the control surface and then I just clip it. Now I know that it's perfectly centered now. Now what I'm going to do when I install this, I've got my L-bend. I've got my little piece of L-bend wire. I'm going to put it in the control horn. Okay, it's sitting in there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off my carbon rod. And I know my servos are centered already. Okay, I've assured that my servos are centered. I'm going to cut off my carbon rod, leaving plenty of room for the Dubro micro connector to hook up. These things require about 1/4 of an inch of bare push rod metal or hookup, the little L-bend wire. They need at least 1/4 inch. 3/8 would be better. So I'm going to cut off my carbon rod, leaving at least 3/8. Okay, there we go. Now it's cut. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set this carbon rod on top. I'm going to set the carbon rod on top of this, my little piece of metal. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it together with a pair of tweezers. So they're right on top. There it is now. I've held it together. I'm holding it together. This is a simulation. And then I'm just going to put a little dot of super glue. And once that super glue sets up, I'm going to take this rod off and I'm going to wrap it with my black thread. I'll wrap with black thread around the junction, and that'll make it indestructibly strong.